ACCPS, this is Jeff Lawson, Superintendent of Cecil County Public Schools. Today is Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, and I have with me
Denise Sopa, Chief Financial Officer.
We'd like to take some time and share with you, frankly, a good bit of information that speaks to how we have closed out our fiscal year 2024 and now moved into our fiscal year 2025 fund balance. And before we get going too much, I just want to give you an idea of fund balance in general. Really, the way we look at fund balance is that those revenues that are not part of our local, state, and federal revenue stream for this fiscal year, money that's left over or in certain buckets in terms of our accounting system. I think for me an appropriate place to start this goes back to a meeting I had with our County Executive Hornberger back in December, where I laid out that looking at our preliminary revenues from the county as well as the state, we were worried of up to a $20 million budget shortfall. At that point, we directed our principals and our program leaders to immediately restrict their spending, as well as human resources limiting what positions are filled and in what capacity certain positions were filled in the event that we filled them in the first place. So with that, I think it's important to understand that from our perspective, again, back in December, coming into January, is that we're coming off of 3 years of maintenance of effort funding. We had fallen to last in the state in terms of per pupil funding in 2023, and in 2024, we moved up to second to last. Very little reason for us to be optimistic as it relates to budgeting for this coming school year, and subsequently we behaved that way fiscally. We tried to conserve and restrict as much spending as possible, not knowing what it would look like as we moved into FY25. And so with that, I'd like to have Ms. Sopa go through our fund balance sheet with you and lay out some line-by-line information that I think you'll find useful.
There are usually a lot of questions about the fund balance, and so just going through some of the designations we think might be helpful for you. So starting with the committed part of the fund balance, subsequent years expenditures is a little over $6 million. And what that means is that we used over $6 million of the fund balance to balance the FY25 budget. That $6 million was part of the unassigned fund balance for FY24, and that meant that we didn't have a plan for it. We didn't have an exact purpose for how we were going to use it, and so those funds were being used to balance the FY25 budget. There's also a budget contingency line, which is a little over $5 million, and what that is our board policy of 2% fund balance, and that's basically our emergency reserve for any catastrophic issues where we would need those extra funds to continue to operate for FY25. Next, if you look at the assigned part of the fund balance, three big areas that pop out would be transitional supplemental instruction, reinstating student support technicians, and positions to address class size. Those three areas together total about $4.8 million, and those are all positions to address early childhood support in those classrooms, student support technicians, which we heard loud and clear from elementary and middle schools are very necessary, and class sizes. We know that we have many classrooms that are above the recommended class size. To keep in mind when we're budgeting for these positions, we budget about the middle of the salary range and an average benefits package. If we hire somebody at the bottom of the salary range, obviously we'll be spending less than we've allotted here. We could hire somebody who has 30 years of experience from another state and then be spending or paying somebody at the top of the salary range. So it's really just an estimate of what we think those positions will cost. Something else to point out, this per pupil allotment for schools, there's been some talk about supplies and spending money on supplies for schools. So every year we budget about $62 per student for every school, and that is what we call the per pupil allotment, or the PPA, and those are the supply accounts that principals have to purchase supplies for schools. And so what we allow schools to do every year is carry over the money they have not spent from one year into the next year. That way, if they're saving for larger things like furniture, sound systems, type of things, they have the money they've carried over from one year to the next. So you can see that amount for $675,000. Next, we have a line that's about $1.1 million for technology and cybersecurity. Through our legislative audit this year, there were some cybersecurity issues that were brought to our attention. And so this is really focusing on positions and technology that's needed to really address some of those cybersecurity concerns to keep our school system safe. Student activities funds, those are funds raised by students, for students. Those are housed in school checking accounts and not used for our operating budget, but we are required to report them as part of our financials. So that $1.8 million is reflected in our fund balance, but cannot be used by us to operate for FY25.
I think this is a great place to point out that while you may hear some folks say that we have a $20-25 million slush fund, if you look at the line-by-line breakdown of our fund balance, much of that money is very much designated and cannot be spent by the board. And so it's a little misleading if you hear those kinds of comments, and what we would ask is that you look at the specific lines and ask yourself what can be spent by the board and what can't be spent by the board.
There's also about $1.9 million for capital projects. So some of those are projects that we started in FY24 that were not completed, that are carrying over into FY25. And that's also money allotted for deferred maintenance. So we have buildings that are in need of repair, older plumbing and HVAC systems. So this is money designated for any type of an emergency repair to keep our buildings safe and operational. At the end of the assigned fund balance, you see about a $2.9 million amount for healthcare. Again, we work with a consultant who reviews our healthcare claims. We are self-insured for health insurance, and they recommend an emergency reserve in the amount that we have catastrophic claims for healthcare. The last part of the fund balance is the unassigned fund balance, and all that means is we don't have a specific plan for this money at this point in time, and that's about $1.6 million. So in total, we added $8 million to the fund balance at the end of FY24 for the reasons that Dr. Lawson stated at the beginning.
And so to close out, there are a couple things. The first being that Ms. Sopa's department, Business Services, has put together the 2025 budget book. It's an in-depth look financially at the school system, how we spend our money and where we spend our money. It breaks it down through operational expenses, capital expenses, as well as debt service. I can't thank her professionally, her department, who have done an outstanding job. The link to the book itself is online. And again, we ask that you look closely at what's in this book. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. And so with that, that's all we have. And as usual, we thank you very much for everything.